Rachel Whitmore, a literary editor in her 30s, has grown used to loneliness. After a miscarriage ended both a pregnancy and a relationship, she buried herself in words and silence, afraid to trust again. But when she collapses from a panic attack at a bookstore, she was helped by a kind stranger, Michael Brennan, a compassionate but visibly haunted doctor with a quiet presence and a past he won't talk about. Drawn together by shared scars and unspoken pain, Rachel and Michael begin a delicate, tentative connection. Through fleeting encounters, handwritten letters, and the slow unraveling of their guarded hearts, they begin to heal. But just as Rachel allows herself to feel again, she learns the truth. Michael was the on-call doctor the night she lost her, a baby, a man who, paralyzed by grief over his own family's loss, had failed to act. The betrayal threatens to tear them apart. Haunted by guilt and determined to become a better man, Michael pours himself into building a community clinic, hoping to bring light to the very neighborhood where he once disappeared. Months later, he invites Rachel to see it. What she finds isn't just a clinic, but a reflection of his growth, humility, and the quiet ways he's making amends. In the final chapter, they stand side by side, not as saviors or victims, but as two imperfect people choosing to stay, love, and move forward together. This is a story you will want to sit back and enjoy. Before we start, I would like you to subscribe, like and comment on this video from where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. Let us begin. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's emergency room buzzed with an unforgiving whiteness that made everything look lifeless. Rachel Thompson sat stiffly on the edge of a molded plastic chair, its cracked surface pressing against her lower back, as if punishing her for being there at all. Her hands, cold and tightly folded in her lap, were trembling, though she told herself it was just the air conditioning. She glanced around the room, a child with a swollen eye resting on his mother's shoulder, an elderly man coughing violently into a napkin, and a young woman crying quietly into her phone. Rachel didn't belong here. She was used to being invisible, to fading into the orderly quiet of the city library where she worked, where life could be catalogued, shelved, and sealed in silence. But her body had rebelled against her over the last 3 days. Painful, embarrassing. Symptoms had escalated until even denial couldn't protect her. Still, she wouldn't have come if her best friend Lisa hadn't given her an ultimatum. Go to the ER or she'd call an ambulance herself. A nurse stepped into the waiting room and called her name gently. Rachel Thompson? Her stomach dropped. She stood slowly, her cheeks already flushed with embarrassment, and followed the nurse down a narrow corridor painted in faded seafoam green. "I'm Clara," the nurse said as they walked. "Room 7. The doctor will be in shortly. Try to relax, dear. We've seen it all." Rachel offered a weak smile, appreciating the kindness even as anxiety churned in her gut. She changed into a paper-thin hospital gown, perching awkwardly on the edge of the exam table. The room smelled of antiseptic and something metallic. A soft knock on the door. "Ms. Thompson?" A warm, calm voice filtered through before the door. Opened. A tall man in his early 30s stepped inside, olive-toned skin, warm brown eyes, and a presence that immediately softened the sharp edges of her discomfort. "I'm Dr. Martinez, Miguel." He didn't tower over her like she expected. Instead, he pulled a chair close and sat, maintaining a respectful distance. "I understand you've been feeling some discomfort," he said, his tone reassuring. "Want to tell me what's been going on?" Rachel hesitated, eyes darting to the floor. But something in his voice, genuine, quiet, patient, unlocked her fear just enough to let the words come. She told him everything, the pain, the fear, the shame. He nodded throughout, never interrupting, never flinching. When she was done, he spoke gently. What you're describing is very common. It's a bacterial infection. Happens to all kinds of people. Nothing you did caused it, and nothing about this is shameful. When he examined her, he explained, every step gave her space to breathe, and never once made her feel exposed or small. He washed his hands at the sink and looked at her with a kind smile. We'll start you on antibiotics. You should feel better within 48 hours. I'll write you a prescription and recommend a follow-up in 5 days. But if anything gets worse before then, come back. No hesitation. As he handed her the script, their fingers brushed. Rachel felt something she hadn't felt in years. Warmth that had nothing to do with embarrassment. Her eyes lifted instinctively to his face. Thank you, she said softly. I was really scared to come in. Miguel's smile deepened. That's what we're here for, and call me Miguel. He left the room, but something in her stayed behind, caught in that moment. The safety, the kindness, the way he'd said her name like it mattered. 1 week later, Rachel returned for her follow-up appointment, heart fluttering for reasons that had little to do with her recovery. But instead of Miguel, she was seen by Dr. Williams, a brisk but friendly woman in her 50s. All clear, she said after reviewing Rachel's chart. Glad you came in when you did. Before Rachel could leave, Dr. Williams looked up and added, Dr. Martinez asked me to tell you he's glad you're feeling better. He doesn't usually follow up on cases personally, but he seemed particularly invested in yours. Rachel walked out of the hospital with a strange ache in her chest, a mix of relief and disappointment. Whatever connection she thought she felt, maybe it was just one-sided. 3 months later, life slipped back into its familiar rhythm. Silent mornings at the library, assisting patrons, organizing archives, escaping into books where love and serendipity made more sense than in the real world. Until one Saturday afternoon, she was shelving new arrivals in the medical reference section when a voice behind her said, Excuse me, could you help me find something on community health initiatives? The book nearly slipped from her fingers. She turned. It was him, Miguel Martinez. No white coat this time, just jeans, a navy sweater, and a sheepish smile. Dr. Martinez, she breathed. He chuckled. Miguel, please. And Rachel, right? From the ER a few months ago? She nodded, her throat dry. I'm researching mobile health clinics, he explained, trying to put together a program for underserved communities. Rachel led him to the right shelf. But neither of them walked away. They talked, for an hour, about medicine, about libraries, about life. It felt easy, like picking up a conversation they'd started years ago. As he glanced at his watch, he looked almost disappointed. I should probably let you get back to work, he said. Rachel surprised herself. My shift ends in 20 minutes. Want to continue over coffee? He smiled. I thought you'd never ask. They had coffee. They talked about everything, his upbringing in a small town with no nearby hospital, her love for books and the belief that libraries were society's quiet sanctuaries. There was laughter, real connection. By the time he walked her to her car, the air between them was electric. I'd like to see you again, he said, and they did, again and again. 6 months later, Rachel stood in St. Mary's ER once more. But now it was for a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Miguel's dream of a mobile clinic had become a reality, with Rachel beside him every step of the way. She'd watched him work tirelessly, pour his soul into every application, every meeting, every night of self-doubt. As he spoke to the crowd about accessible care and community support, she felt a pride that bloomed deep and steady in her chest. Later, in the crowd, he found her and laced his fingers through hers. So, he said playfully, how does it feel to be dating a guy who's technically a millionaire now? Rachel laughed. I think I fell for the doctor, not the grant money. Good, he said, because I fell for the librarian who helped a stranger find what he didn't know he was looking for. That night, curled up beside him, he whispered, You were brave that day. You changed the way I see everything. She kissed him. In the silence, they both knew. They'd found something rare. But 3 weeks later, as Rachel unlocked her mailbox one rainy Tuesday, she found an envelope with no return address. She opened it casually, but as her eyes skimmed, the words typed in clean, clinical font, her breath caught in her throat. "Miguel Martinez is not who you think he is. You deserve to know the truth." A photograph slipped out. Rachel stared at it, stunned, and suddenly everything began to unravel. The rain tapped a slow, steady rhythm against Rachel's window as she sat frozen on the couch, the letter trembling. In her hands, the paper was thin, cheap, like it had been printed at a library kiosk or an internet cafe, but its words burned into her chest like acid. "Miguel Martinez is not who you think he is. You deserve to know the truth." She reread it. Then stared at the photograph that had fallen out like a loaded secret. It was grainy and looked like a scan of an old newspaper clipping. 2 men in white coats stood in front of a hospital. One was unmistakably Miguel, only younger, leaner, his hair styled differently. He was shaking hands with another man, but it was the headline that made Rachel's blood run cold. "Rising star surgeon suspended after patient death inquiry." Her heart thudded against her ribcage. Miguel. She turned the photo over. On the back, someone had scrawled in blue ink, "Look into Ridgeview Hospital, 2018. He changed his name after the scandal." Rachel sat in silence for a long while, the letter heavy in her lap, her mind unraveling. Memories like thread from a sweater. The way Miguel had been reluctant to talk about his past. How he'd brushed off questions about medical school or former hospitals with charming vagueness. How he'd told her he preferred to focus on the future. Was that because the past was a lie? A cold whisper crept through her. Had she fallen for a man who wasn't even who he claimed to be? Later that night, Miguel was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, making his famous lentil stew. The smell of cumin and garlic usually made her feel safe, home even. But tonight, Rachel stood in the hallway, watching him like a stranger. She tucked the letter into her coat pocket. "Hey," he said, smiling as he stirred the pot. "You okay? You look pale." "I just didn't sleep well," she lied. He walked over, kissed her forehead. "Want to talk about it?" She shook her head, heart pounding. Not yet. She needed answers first. Facts, not accusations. Wait. Ensure to subscribe, like, and comment on this story. Thank you. 2 days later, Rachel called in sick to the library. Then she took a bus to the city archive. In the dim, musty-smelling basement, she scoured old newspaper records from Ridgeview Hospital in 2018. Her hands shook as she turned microfilm pages. Scanning headlines. There it was, tragedy at Ridgeview, promising surgeon suspended, pending investigation. The article mentioned a young doctor named Michael Santiago, not Miguel Martinez. Same face, same eyes. It detailed a surgical mishap. A teenage girl died on the operating table during a routine appendectomy. The family had claimed negligence. Santiago had allegedly failed to follow protocol. Internal hospital politics were involved. Rumors swirled about cover-ups, scapegoats, and pressure from above. In the end, the hospital had quietly suspended him while reviewing his conduct. He disappeared shortly after. Rachel stared at the screen, her chest tightening. He didn't just change hospitals. He changed his identity. That evening, when Miguel walked through the door, humming softly, Rachel was waiting at the kitchen table with the letter in front of her. The photo, the article printouts. He froze. Her voice was quiet, controlled. "Is your name even Miguel Martinez?" Silence stretched between them. Then he exhaled slowly and pulled out a chair, sat down across from her. "No," he said. "It was Michael Santiago. That was my name." She flinched. He reached out instinctively, then pulled his hand back. "Let me explain." Her jaw clenched. "You lied to me." "I didn't lie. I left it behind." "That's not the same thing." Miguel's shoulders slumped. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked smaller, vulnerable, human in a way that made her ache even as her trust fractured. I was a surgical resident at Ridgeview. There was a patient, young girl. Complications happened. The family blamed me, and maybe they were right. Maybe I froze. I still think about her face every day. His voice cracked. But the hospital wanted someone to blame. They made sure it was me. Rachel's voice was brittle. So you ran? I left before it ruined me, before I became someone I couldn't look at in the mirror. I changed my name, went back to school, recertified. I've spent every day since trying to make up for that moment. She stared at him. The man she'd trusted, loved. I should have told you, he said softly. But I was afraid that you'd look at me like you are. Right now, Rachel stood, hands trembling. I don't know who you are anymore. He stood too. I'm the same man who held your hand in the ER, who built a clinic because people like you deserve care without shame, who fell in love with a librarian because she saw people the way I wanted to be seen again. She turned away, silent tears sliding down her cheek. I need time, she whispered. He didn't argue. 3 weeks later, Rachel walked the rows of the library in silence. Every corner of her life felt different now, split in two, before and after. Her friends asked where Miguel was. She just smiled and said, "We're taking a break." But at night, she replayed his words, that broken honesty, that plea for forgiveness. Then one afternoon, as she returned from lunch, she saw a small box on her desk. Inside was a single hardcover book, The Art of Healing by Henry Nouwen. Tucked inside was a note, "I never expected forgiveness, but I hoped for understanding. If you ever want to talk, I'll be waiting, at the place where it all began." It was signed with his real name, Michael. Rachel closed the book, heart hammering. She knew where he meant, the ER. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above as Rachel stepped through the hospital's sliding glass doors. The smell, disinfectant, sterile gloves, and something faintly metallic hit her like a memory she didn't know she'd held on to. This was the same ER she'd stumbled into months ago, clutching her side, scared and alone. And he, Miguel, no, Michael, had taken her hand and stayed with her through the pain, the diagnosis, the tears, and now she was here to face him again. Not as a patient, not even as the woman who loved him, but as someone standing at the edge of something breakable and choosing whether to rebuild or walk away. Down the hall, she saw him before he saw her. He was leaning against a wall near the nurse's station, hands in the pockets of his white coat, gazing down the corridor like he wasn't really seeing it. His face looked tired, more worn than she remembered. His stubble was darker and the light in his eyes dimmer, but he was still him. Rachel's heart tugged. She walked toward him slowly, each step measured and quiet. When she was a few feet away, he turned. Their eyes met. He blinked once, stunned, then straightened. "You came." "I wasn't sure I would," she admitted, voice low, "but I needed to see you." "I meant every word in that note," he said gently. "I didn't send it to pull you back. I just wanted you to know I'm still standing in the truth, no matter what you decide." Rachel searched his face. "Why didn't you ever tell me, even after everything we shared?" "I was ashamed," he said, "not just of the mistake, but of surviving it, of moving on while someone else didn't." There was a pause. Rachel crossed her arms, not angry, just raw. "Do you still think about her, the girl?" Michael nodded. "Every day. Her name was Sophia. She was 17. Wanted to be a poet." Rachel's throat tightened. "You remember her that clearly." He looked away. I remember her laugh before the surgery. I remember her mother's scream when I came out to deliver the news. I remember the silence afterward, the kind that wraps around your soul and chokes it. Rachel felt a shiver run down her spine. I don't know if I'm a good man, Rachel, he whispered, but I've tried to be a better one. That's why I built the clinic, why I wake up at night thinking about how to keep people safe. I didn't run to hide, I ran to restart. And us? She asked, voice cracking. Was that real, or just part of the restart? He stepped closer, his eyes glistening. It was the realest thing I've had since Sophia. The hum of the ER returned. Beeping machines, rolling carts, a nurse's laughter somewhere down the hall. But between them, silence reigned. Heavy, electric. Rachel's hands fidgeted. I thought I knew who you were, she said finally. And now I realize maybe I still do, just not in the way I expected. He tilted his head, hopeful. I don't have an answer yet, she added quickly. I'm still figuring out if I can trust you again. I understand, but I do know this. She looked him in the eye. People who hide have something to be afraid of, but people who tell the truth, even when it breaks them, that takes strength. Michael swallowed hard. Rachel stepped forward and did something unexpected. She reached out and took his hand. I don't forgive you yet, she said softly, but I see you. The whole, messy, broken version of you. He nodded, his grip tightening. That's more than I deserve. Later that night, Rachel sat in her apartment staring at a blank journal page. Then she began to write, healing doesn't always look like medicine or miracles. Sometimes it looks like two people standing in a hallway, admitting they're afraid, and choosing to show up anyway. She set the pen down. Outside, rain began to fall, soft, rhythmic, familiar. Weeks passed. Rachel had returned to her routines, editing manuscripts, replying to emails, walking through the park in the early mornings, with coffee in hand. But something had changed. The world no longer felt distant. It hummed again. Quietly, but steadily, and a part of that hum, impossibly, was Michael. They had seen each other again, twice. No declarations, no grand promises, just small, careful moments. A lunch outside the hospital courtyard, a walk through the market, a letter she found folded in her mailbox, written in his familiar hand. Each time she saw more of the man behind the mistake, the man who held both shame and hope in the same breath. Then one morning she received a simple text. Come see the clinic today? I want to show you what became of the silence. The neighborhood had long been forgotten by funding and headlines. But tucked between a boarded laundromat and a cracked basketball court, Michael's clinic stood like a heartbeat. Quiet, but alive. Rachel stepped inside and blinked. The walls weren't sterile white, but soft sage. There were paintings, children's paintings, and a bookshelf in the waiting room filled with old classics and dog-eared poetry collections. This doesn't feel like a clinic, she murmured. Michael, who had been quietly watching her take it all in, smiled. That's the point. He led her through the halls. She met a nurse named Clara, who greeted her like an old friend. An elderly man named Luis waved from one of the exam rooms. Laughter spilled from a children's corner where two siblings waited for checkups. This is what you built, she said, stunned. No, Michael replied. This is what they built. I just made space for it. They ended the tour in his small, cluttered office. Rachel glanced around. A framed newspaper, article, a crayon drawing labeled Dr. Mike with uneven hearts around it. And taped to his lamp, faded and creased, was the same note he'd written her. You kept it, she whispered. Michael looked down. It reminds me what matters. Rachel turned to him. And what does matter, Michael? He stepped closer. You do, he said simply. Not just because I love you, but because you saw me when I couldn't see myself. She held his gaze, heart pounding. I'm not asking for everything, he said. Not yet. I just want a chance to prove that I've learned how to stay, even when it's hard. She took a slow breath. I don't want to be the reason you keep proving yourself, she said softly. I just want to walk beside the man who no longer runs. A pause, then a smile from both. He nodded. Then let's walk. 6 months later. It was late spring. The clinic was buzzing with volunteers prepping for the annual community health fair. Music floated from a borrowed speaker and kids chased balloons across the lot. Rachel sat beneath a shade tent with a typewriter someone had found in storage, offering free poems on demand for anyone who wanted one. She looked up and saw Michael laughing with a young boy, letting him wear his stethoscope. His face was lighter now, not because the past was erased, but because he no longer carried it alone. He caught her gaze and smiled. She smiled back. Later that evening, after the tents were packed and the sun dipped low, Rachel and Michael stood on the clinic rooftop, watching the city blink awake in lights. You remember the day we met? He asked. She nodded. I was in pain. I couldn't breathe. And now, she turned to him. Now I can. He reached into his pocket and handed her a folded paper. It was another note. She unfolded it slowly. I once believed redemption was a door forever locked. But then you knocked, not to break it open, but to wait until I had the courage to turn the handle myself. She looked up, eyes shining. You're really something, Dr. Michael. He took her hand. Only because you reminded me how to feel again. They stood there as the wind picked up slightly, brushing past like memory and promise all at once. In the quiet, she leaned into him. And he didn't move, didn't flinch, just stayed. This time, for good.